Hello and welcome to Project Recovery, a show about addiction, but more importantly, we're all about recovery here. And this show is brought to you by Reprieve Recovery Center, reprieverc.com up in Morgan, Utah. They're a beautiful center, all-women's facility. They have all the traditional treatment options and more to help women who are struggling with addictions of all types. Up in Morgan, Utah, where I'm from. It's a beautiful place, and I'm proud to say that Reprieve is there in Morgan. So you can go to reprieverc.com and check them out if you want to get more information. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about something I did yesterday. So yesterday, I have 4 kids, and my 4th child, my only daughter, she graduated from high school, Bountiful High School, last night. And we were up in Ogden at the D Event Center. I love Ogden. Beautiful. It's where my family relatives are from, and I always love being up there in Ogden. And so it was there. It was a little bit, I don't know, a little bit, I was a little emotional at times, just my youngest graduating and leaving high school, and now I just have to try to get them all out of the house. But, they're great kids. And I was thinking about, we went to dinner afterwards, and they were talking about whether or not my daughter and her friends wanted to go to the all-night lock-in party. And we had a lock-in party, and I think it was pretty new back then, and it's gained a lot of momentum around the country, a lot of lock-in parties. And what they do is either at the high school or at around here, they'll do it at a fun center like Boondocks sometimes. And they'll have a plate. You sign a thing and you come in, and you're not supposed to leave. And you stay there all night, and they have parties and prizes and, really cool stuff. Kids will take home TVs and laptops and stereos and iPhones, and there's raffles and games and lots of food and music and, places to hang out. And the idea is to help reduce fatalities, really, on graduation night, because unfortunately, that has always been a big problem. Lots of kids losing their lives on graduation night. In a few statistics about that, that about 3,000 graduates every year, seniors in high school, die in automobile accidents that involve drunk driving. And about 225,000 go to the emergency room for related serious injuries on graduation night. So the idea is, if, around the country, if we put these things together, and a lot of businesses are great to donate, services and food and prizes, and to keep the kids in all night long on graduation night. Not every place does it. I like to say this fiance, Ashley, she said she went to Olympus High School right here in Salt Lake, and she said she doesn't remember that they did that back in, she graduated in 89. I'm dating an older lady. Actually, she's only 11 days older. But, May through August is also the time. So I wanted just to talk today about like summertime graduation. What do we do with kids? We want them to have a good time. Some people don't like this idea of the lock-in parties, like I should be able to leave if I want. But a lot of kids are safer. And in fact, they have said the good news is that since 1991, when a lot, I was in 90 and 91, that early 90s is when this idea started to catch on as an effort to protect children. I call them children. I know 18-year-olds don't like to be called children. And yes, I realize they can go to the military at 18. But I mean, neurologically, developmentally at 18, you're definitely a kid.
Own scale.
Right, yeah. My own scale is like, you'd be 25 before you're considered an adult in my world. But that kicks off kind of a deadly season for teenagers and drunk driving. And even though in the population of people I work with, a lot of them are teenagers, and I would say substance abuse-wise, marijuana is probably the number one of the kids that come in to see me. But apparently, if you look at stats, alcohol and drunk driving are still the drug of choice for teenagers around the country. And we do know that alcohol is much more likely to involve, accidents than marijuana. Not that you should drive impaired. Don't misunderstand me. But summer is kind of a tough time. The National Institute of Drugs said nearly half of high school seniors said that binge drinking on the weekend is not a problem. I thought that was interesting, that despite all of the efforts of, Mothers Against Drunk Driving and Red Ribbon Week and all these different things that we do, we still have about 50% of seniors in high school feeling like binge drinking on a weekend is not a problem. And to me, that's not a lack of education. It's a lack of neural connections. It's just that's how a teenager thinks. I think it was Julius Caesar said a pretty sad quote, but tells maybe about his thinking, that the most dangerous animal on the planet is an 18-year-old boy. And the reason he said that was he liked to put the 18-year-olds up, the older teenagers up in the front of his army, because they were too dumb to know that they were about to die. So they would, just go do whatever he said. And that shows you the impulsivity and this feeling of invincibility that teenagers have. And so unfortunately we have the majority, or almost the majority, 50% of kids think binge drinking is okay. In the summertime, about 33% of teens who are involved in fatal car accidents are using alcohol, and it jumps up to over 40% on graduation night alone. So, this right now is a time all around the country, especially here in the state of Utah. We got a bunch of high schools doing their graduations this week and next week and the following week. And so it's important to keep in mind that we want to, protect kids if we can. The CDC did surveys of 8th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders, and all three pretty much said the same thing, that binge drinking on the weekends when you don't have schoolwork is probably not a problem, and it's still their number one drug of choice around the country. And so younger teens aren't any less susceptible to that, and that makes sense the way their brains work. So, and a lot of kids are like, why does it jump up in those ages? Partly it's that feeling of invincibility. They don't realize, just exactly how quickly life can come to an end. Or, we've had, you remember Sarah that was on the show who, she lost her legs and in a drunk driving accident. The other person was intoxicated. So it may not even necessarily be that you are intoxicated as a teenager, but invincibility, lack of foresight, lack of experience. I mean, I'm 52, and I probably would have done a lot of things differently when I was a teenager, young adult, if I had the experience that I have now. And plus, alcohol is still associated with celebrating. Yeah. And that's the big thing that happens on graduation, is that people want to celebrate. And as adults, we celebrate the kids. For my daughter, we had, cards and money gifts and balloons and flowers and a big dinner with, everybody out last night. And so we want them to feel special and celebrated. And, they do the ceremony with the robes and the hats and all that stuff. And that can carry over into let's keep the good time rolling, and by 10 o'clock I was wiped out. But of course the teenagers want to keep partying, and drugs and alcohol, especially alcohol, if you look at commercials, people drinking alcohol are usually having a pretty good time. So that's, one thing. And then how do you talk to your kids about it? So let's get into that. Because a lot of people are like, yeah, we know that, but, what can we really do about it? And the truth is, most parents feel, who are surveyed, most parents feel hesitant or awkward in talking to their kids about drugs and alcohol. And the biggest thing is they say, well, I just think my kid knows. I think they know not to do that. I think they know not to drive drunk or get in a car with somebody who's been drinking. And guess what? They don't. There is no evidence of that. I think it's sort of wishful thinking and, frankly, avoidance of that awkward conversation. Teenagers don't always take conversations really well. And they don't want to be told. So, when are some good times to talk to your teenagers about it? I would say look for opportunities. Anytime they ask to borrow a car, or if they have their own car that they're going somewhere, those are great opportunities to talk about it. I'm a big believer, because the evidence shows, and it was my experience growing up, and hopefully my kids feel this way, that dinner time is a great time to talk about things. You're face to face for a few minutes, and that's a great time to bring it up. riding with a friend, like if you have a teen who's like, oh, my friends are coming to pick me up, we're going to the skate park or we're going to a concert or wherever we're going, that's a really great time. And pretty much any time. You need to reinforce whatever your expectations are. So one of the things, my boys' eyes would glaze over. My daughter's a little bit better, but they would just be like, yeah, and you can tell. And I would empathize with them. Like, I know it's annoying for me to bring this up. And that sort of, I felt like, burst the bubble in the room. I'd say, but you need to understand a few things. One, and so these are things I recommend for people. I think they're pretty common. One is I definitely expect that you would never drink and drive, okay? And if you have been drinking and you need to get somewhere, then let's work on getting you set up with rideshare. And so one of the things, an action a parent could take this week would be to make sure that their kid's phone is set up with, something like Lyft or Uber, or one of those, and that it's hooked up to a payment system so that they can get a ride home anytime, anywhere that they are. That's great, because even just 10 years ago, that wasn't available to us. And so that's a saving grace right there. Taxis, if you would prefer to do it that way, but letting them know we'd be happy to go pick your car up somewhere else tomorrow if you made the right choice of taking an Uber home tonight. You can have some friends or relatives kind of identified as people that are safe to call for a ride. Staying at the location wherever they are is always an option. I like to talk to the kids about that. And actually just kind of making sure that, here's the thing, resistance is kids are like, I can't believe you would think I would do that. And so a lot of parents don't know what to do with that, because they may even assume, well, I don't think my kid would do that, so I don't really need to talk to them. Actually, what you ought to say to them is, I don't think you would do this, but the reason I'm bringing it up, just to reinforce kind of what my expectations are and give you some solutions of things to do with this, is that I just care about you, and I want to make sure that you are reminded, and you may be able to be a good influence on others. So if you see somebody else that is going to get in their car and drive, a friend or somebody at a party, maybe you would be willing, since we've had this conversation, to step up. And I've always told my kids, like, if you have to use your Uber to get them, your Uber account to pay for them to go home safely, I'm happy to pay for that, And so I think having that open conversation is always better than assuming you've got a good kid who's not going to do anything wrong. And I think, a lot of parents do trust their kids, and so they don't really think to have those kind of conversations with them.
One thing that you said, I think not being accountable, but being kind of empathetic towards others, I think that kind of bridges the gap of you talking to them personally, because people aren't going to, they'll consume the information from your parent, but it just won't be the same as if you personally are in a situation where you see others doing something like that negatively. I think that can kind of reinforce what you're talking about, because in my mind, I just think back to the times when my parents told me not to do something.
Yeah.
And it's just like right over the head. But if I'm put into a situation where someone else is doing something that I was told was not responsible, then it's different. Then you kind of look at it differently. And I think that is a way that I'm assuming that's how others kind of can kind of put themselves in their own shoes of being like,
well, teenagers get defensive, right? And they're oppositional.
Yep.
And so, if you're defensive and oppositional, anything that you're told feels like a lecture. Yep. And you have a desire to do the opposite or something else.
Especially if you're Casey.
Especially Casey's
if you're
still
Casey.
But I mean, we can relate to that. Most of us remember being that way somewhat as teenagers.
Yeah.
And you're right, actually, by taking, putting them in sort of a position of empathy where they can help others, I think also helps them be less defensive to what you're talking about.
Yep.
Also just telling them up front, hey, I trust you. I think you're going to make good choices, but I just want to review options just in case. But it empowers them to do something good for a friend. And that's where a lot of teenagers' loyalties lie, is not necessarily with doing what you want them to do, but what would make them a good friend? Because social life and friendships are the most important things at that age.
Yeah.
So anyway, I wanted to talk about that. It was just kind of an interesting night. I don't know. It's fun to have all my kids graduated. It's also, end of an era kind of thing. I used to really love doing all the school stuff with my kids, and I guess that's over with, but it's good because they're graduated, so that's a success. But it just got me thinking about like safety and drinking and driving, and when I started looking up some statistics about just how many kids still, even though since 1991, 54% decrease in fatal alcohol-related car accidents on graduation for seniors. That's a huge reduction, but we still have thousands of kids every year that die on graduation night. So hopefully that's something that people, parents specifically, are brave enough to bring up with their kids. And, to be honest, from a psychologist point of view, even if the kid looks super uninterested, they roll their eyes, they tell you like, I can't believe you're accusing me of that. Are you accusing me, Dad? That kind of stuff. They're hearing it. If you don't have the conversation, they don't hear it. So you got to have the conversation. And if you can empower them with some strategies for what to do if they or their friends are drinking or using something else and they're impaired, then they're more likely to do it. And the stats really do show that if you have that conversation, they're more likely to be safe. So, and the lock-in parties are a great idea. If your kid's waffling, I would say encourage them to go and encourage them to rally their friends. I believe, I never win anything. It's sort of a sore point in my life. I'm not lucky, I don't think, in winning. I'm lucky.
That's the most pessimistic I've ever heard.
Well, I mean, it's more like a fact at this point. Like, I'm lucky.
That's also very pessimistic of you.
Yeah, it is. I'm extremely lucky and blessed in a lot of ways, mostly with the people who are in my life. But as far as like prizes, that's why Casey loves gambling. Gambling makes me nervous.
You have to play to win.
No, I never win. I always lose. And so I always think about like what I could have bought with that money. But this started off, I was still young and naive thinking I could win things. And we had a blast at our senior lock-in party. I remember it was at our high school, and they set up like a go-kart track in the back, and we had games and prizes. And I think the big prize was like a big TV. Back then you had to have people help you move a TV because they were so big. I believe Danny Glick won the TV. Pretty sure it was Danny.
Don't call him out personally because you've still got a grudge against Danny.
Dan. It's okay. I mean, a little bit more jealousy, I think it was. I think Danny won the big TV, and I was thinking, man, if I had that big TV, I'd be really popular this fall at college, right? Show up in the dorm with the big TV. Wasn't to be.
I'm sure you were popular in college.
I don't know. I think it's been downhill since high school. Oh.
Ever since Danny won the TV.
Ever since Danny won the TV, I don't know. So that's one thing that was on my mind. The other thing is this idea, it comes up a lot on the show, and that is the stigma of substance use and abuse and addiction. And, what can we do about that? I believe I've been a psychologist here in Salt Lake for 20 years as of last fall. And I believe I've seen a tremendous decrease in the stigma and the stereotypes around it. But that might be colored by the fact that I am doing this show and working with people all the time. And I have sort of a different perspective, treatment model perspective, as opposed to, just not seeing it from that point of view, I guess. And I was doing a little deep dive on the stigma, and it's hard to find any good research showing whether it's really decreased or not. I think that it's mostly been helpful that social media has sort of embraced this idea of taking care of your mental health. I think it's been one of the more few positive things that have come out of COVID is this conversation about, depression, mental health, isolation, reaching out. We've had some great people here in the state of Utah help us with things like the Safe UT app, and we now have the nationwide suicide hotline, and the University of Utah Healthcare does a great job with their lines, 801-587-3000, which can help a person get some 24-hour suicide prevention. So there's been a lot of progress that way. But one of the things that I thought I'd bring up is the stigma of substance use and abuse actually still among healthcare providers. They are struggling with kind of letting go, some healthcare providers of letting go of that. Not the ones that work in mental health and substance abuse so much, but more like family practice type folks, emergency room folks, and probably because they have a different focus in how they take care of people. One of the things that seems to be a big problem there is if they don't bring it up to somebody who comes in and sort of demonstrates to them that it's okay to talk about it, that a lot of people will not seek treatment because of the stigma. So going in to see your family doctor, one of the standard questions is, do you drink alcohol? If so many, how many questions? But, a lot of people will look at that and say, well, I don't, I like my doctor. I don't want them to think anything negative towards me. I don't want them to know I drink, 10 times what I just wrote down on the piece of paper, or that I use marijuana because maybe I don't have a medical card, or, being able to talk about getting a medical card for that, or using, psychedelics. I even have people come into my office and they'll have read things about psychedelics, which I think we'll do a show on here pretty soon, because they're like, well, I heard it can be good, but they're like, is it okay if I talk to you about that? I'm like, well, yeah, of course. And so I need to do a better job, I think, of making sure people feel comfortable bringing these things up. But the biggest problem that we see is that because there's still a stigma around addiction or even use, that people avoid talking about it with their doctor, and therefore they don't get some help and support. Just a quick stat that I thought was interesting. This is pretty recent, 2021. And this is amongst people who felt they needed substance use treatment. These aren't just people who don't really think they need it. These are people who are like, I really could use some help with my substance use and abuse. 10.5% of those people still didn't get treatment because they wouldn't admit it. They wouldn't tell anybody about it. And I think we see that a little bit on the show. People talk about their history before they got treatment, and they didn't want it. They would only go in because they got in trouble or they were forced by family members. One way to help, so this would go for healthcare providers and everybody else, is to change the language. And at first I had some reservations about this because I feel like, does it really matter if you change the language, changing words over time to make them more politically correct? But this, I realized, has a different bent. This is to make our understanding of substance use and addiction more accurate. One of the reasons that people still hold on to the stigma about this is they don't understand what causes addiction. And there's still this moral tinge to it that, like, these people are just having fun, or they're partying, or they're disregarding rules. They're kind of bad people, so to speak. And that's why they have this problem. If they would just stop, it would be okay. Like, why don't they get their lives together? And so part of that, people hold on to that idea because they don't realize that's not how it works, right? This isn't, substance use and addiction are not, moral issues. Now, I realize, some religions and other moral tenets might say you should never drink alcohol or use these things, and that's fine. I get that. That's not really what I'm talking about. But I've known plenty of very religious people who have, for one reason or another, gotten involved in using a substance and then become addicted. Like, how many times have we had people on the show that
I couldn't even count,
were otherwise perfectly healthy, definitely, good citizen type people who had a surgery or had some other thing come up and they ended up using an opiate or having a drink, and then all of a sudden they find themselves in this dilemma of having an addiction. So I thought, well, maybe it does make a difference. So I thought I'd throw out a few words that we use that they are recommending we change. I will say their biggest problem is the new words or phrases aren't as catchy. So the word addict, and it's too bad Casey isn't here because I think he would agree with this because he doesn't like some of these terms for himself and other people do like them. So I think it's okay if you're the person, but we want to make sure people understand why we're using the terms that we use. So the first one is addict on the list. They said instead of addict, you could say a person with substance use disorder. It's a mouthful.
I feel like we've interchangeably used those pretty frequently.
Yeah, we do now. That's one that I think is changing a lot. Instead of saying, oh, he's an addict and sort of being dismissive about the person, it takes it from saying that the person has a problem instead of is a problem. Like you're an addict is a
actually,
qualifier.
you know what? When you say it like that, it sounds so hard.
It is harsh, right? And it's very dismissive and it's very blaming, right? But if you were to say, well, that's a person who's struggling with or has a substance use disorder, then you're like, oh, okay, they're dealing with something.
It's definitely a more
it's not them
approach.
As a character trait.
Yep.
Sometimes in personality research, we talk about states versus traits. And a state is temporary and a trait is permanent. And so calling someone an addict is kind of permanent, right? It's that's who you are versus just the state of dealing with a substance use disorder. Anyway, so depersonalizing it helps us see them differently and hopefully helps them see themselves differently. A lot of people believe these things. How about user? They're a user. Have you ever...
You know what? We don't actually hear user.
I don't hear that
often.
one a ton.
Yeah.
But same sort of thing that's a person with, an opioid use addiction or something like that. Abuser, junkie. Junkie's a bad one. That's a holdover from 50 years ago, probably.
I was going to say it's 10 years ago.
So that they're recommending for junkie, they would say that's a person in active use or in active addiction or in active having an active problem with substance use disorder, which, by the way, is the technical term. SUD. You've heard people come on the show and say, oh, I'm a SUDSy now, and that means they're a substance use disorder counselor.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So far, I think it's when it goes from a noun or an actual thing compared to something that you were experiencing, I think it's so different.
Yeah.
It is easier to say you are an addict because it's over encompassing of what people are already familiar with compared to I'm struggling with the substance abuse disorder. But I do think people, like, as we get further along and people start being more empathetic towards like other people's struggles, I do think that might be a little more commonplace than just being like, he's an addict.
Right. Yeah,
So,
No, definitely.
Yeah.
And it's worked in other areas we don't really even realize. So they used to label kids who were struggling in school as a dunce. Remember the dunce cap?
I do not.
I know that's
long
before
time
my
ago.
time. But they would put a dunce cap on, or at least that's the cartoon.
That would literally break the news if that happened today.
That would, and there'd be arrests.
Yeah.
But calling someone a dunce or calling someone stupid or calling someone dumb, now you're saying, that's their trait. That's part of who they are.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, kids grow up believing I'm dumb, I'm stupid. Later, we found out, some of these kids have a learning disorder or have attention deficit disorder. And so it's like, that's something they're struggling with. They're struggling with this disorder. We can get them some help. And nowadays in education, hopefully we're not hearing that anymore. Alcoholics on the list. Person with alcohol use disorder is the preferred nomenclature now. But that's a mixed one, right? Because we've had people on the show that are like, I like to say I'm an alcoholic, and that's,
Part of
to
their
them,
ownership.
Yeah, that's part of their process. But, Casey doesn't like that. And a lot of people I know actually don't like that because it instead of it takes it out of that trait into a state. But then the risky thing is, if they downplay it too much, will they go back to it? So maybe that's a personal preference.
Yeah, it's also hard to tell someone how they want to classify their personal struggles.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if someone is okay with being called an alcoholic or an addict because it helps them root themselves in their recovery, like, who are we to be like, you should
Right.
be known as something else?
But maybe those of us who aren't struggling with it ourselves, so in my case, healthcare provider or just being a friend, family, neighbor, whatever, maybe we should try to use
Softer language.
Or actually, the idea is more accurate. This is a person who has alcohol use disorder, or they're struggling with substance use disorder. And again, it is softer, but it's more accurate technically, because there are treatments available, and we do know that substance use, even one time, has an effect on the brain and the body. Repeated use can turn into, well, let's go through the ascending order. Use would be a person had a drink. Abuse would be kind of they overdid it. They had a bunch of drinks, maybe binge drinking, they got drunk. Dependency would be, I don't feel good unless I have my substance. I don't feel like I can really go. Like, I talk to people, I work a lot in anxiety disorders, and I know plenty of people say, I know this isn't healthy, Dr. Woolley, but before I go to a party or a gathering, I feel like I have to have a drink or I have to have a smoke just to calm my nerves down. It's like, okay, so to some degree that person started to feel, at least in certain situations, dependent on that. And for some people, their dependency is a daily thing. They feel like, I just can't make it through the day without my substance. We see that with vapes all the time. People, trying to sneak into airplane bathrooms to use their vape and all that kind of stuff. And then the only difference between dependency and addiction really is that withdrawal. So at addiction, we would say the person not only feels dependent, that they need their substance to function either in one or every situation, but now when they don't have it, their body pitches a fit and they start to have withdrawal symptoms, which are very physiological and in some cases can be life-threatening, actually. Dependency is probably something we need to avoid, not just addiction, right? Drunk, that's another one. I think drunk and junkie are pretty old-fashioned. But remember Casey's story about his son walking into the Maverick and announcing, hey, my dad's not a drunk anymore. I thought that was really cute, but I wonder where he picked that up, because probably from Casey.
Yeah, probably from Casey. Those type of words, like, you're right. The accuracy of them doesn't explain the actual problem. Whereas you're talking about a disorder, like in so many cases, we've had so many people who struggle with addiction have also struggled with mental health issues.
Right.
So if you just say you're a drunk or you're an addict, you're not even acknowledging the overall issue. So
right. It's kind of like in mental health, like the old term crazy or lunatic, right? Or they're mad. Those kinds of terms, they're really just negative labels. You're a crazy person, you're a lunatic or whatever. And certainly it has no information in that term about what's really happening with the person.
But it's easy for people to say.
It's easy to say.
To label someone else as something.
And I think of crazy behavior as could be owned by anybody, whether you have mental health issues or not. Like, sometimes crazy behavior means a person was acting silly or impulsive, wild and crazy kind of stuff. To me, I don't even really associate that with an actual mental health issue anymore.
Yeah.
More teenage behavior, maybe.
You know what? And I mean, it's the same thing with junkie. I mean, I guess I'm not running around crowds that are struggling with that type of use, but junkie and crazy, well, I guess they are a little bit different to me. But hearing junkie is... But it's not comical, but it's just it's such an outdated term to me.
Super outdated. If you were to say someone's crazy versus if you said something like, this person has obsessive compulsive disorder,
right.
Now it's like, oh, that actually gives me some information. It takes it from a trait to a state, and it's like, this is just something they're dealing with right now. Maybe it's treatable. We know it is treatable. It engenders empathy and compassion. The idea that we could help a person or at least not make their life harder. But I think a lot of terms are born out of fear. That person's a junkie. That person's crazy. And the fear is usually not warranted. I know that if a schizophrenic person physically injures someone, it makes the news and it's a big deal. But did you know that I don't even know the exact, I think it's like 70, a regular person is like 70 times more likely to hurt someone than a schizophrenic. But we don't focus in on that. We focus in on the fact that they had a mental health problem.
Right.
But even using a term like schizophrenia or psychosis is much more accurate and can help us understand, okay, this person's struggling. We could help them with their disorder versus just labeling them. A habit, that's actually one that's on the list. Instead of saying somebody, they've got a bad habit, it's sort of, they, again, kind of say that they're struggling with drug addiction or substance use disorder.
Habit is kind of on the fence for me because it still implies like a behavioral like tendency to do something. So I guess that one's a little bit closer to grounded in reality compared to junkie and some of those others. But yeah, a
little bit closer, but still sort of implies maybe they just knock it off. Just stop your habit, right? It's a bad habit. Quit picking your fingernails. Quit shooting heroin. Not really the same. There's a few more, I guess. Well, these are actually more for healthcare workers, but I wondered what you thought. When we talk about testing, toxicology reports and stuff like that, instead of labeling them clean or dirty, we should say they tested positive or negative for the substance.
Yeah, that seems self-explainable.
I think I've never heard in my work people use clean or dirty, but
you know what? That's the thing. Like, maybe we should bring like an actual like worker that has
somebody who reads the lab reports.
Yeah, because they might that might be common terminology for them, and it in that like sphere it might be just normal.
So one of the great things about electronic medical records is, if I have a patient who had a CAT scan or an MRI, I can pull that up and look at it. I can look at their toxicology reports. A lot of times the patients I work with have recently been hospitalized, and so those sorts of reports are available in their chart. And when I talk, we do a lot of like comprehensive care where there's maybe a psychiatrist and a psychologist and a social worker and a nurse all talking about the patient and trying to provide what we do. I've never heard anybody say clean or dirty. I hear test, they were positive for opioids or
clean and dirty
like
kind of just like implies like an unprofessional setting to me, but that's from.
But I think that might have been more common back in the day. So maybe it's working its way out of healthcare, but in the public, I don't know if that's still. But I bring it up today mostly just to get people thinking, like the words we use, the way we talk is a reflection of how we think. And the way the words we hear and use inform how we think. So it's a circular relationship, right? It goes both ways. And so one way to change, I think when I grew up, if you saw a homeless person, you call them a bum, right? Or a vagrant. Vagrant might be a little more accurate, but it's still a put down. Still a label that you put on someone. You call them a bum or a junkie or that person's crazy. Those kinds of terms, they have emotional results when you say the words. One interesting study has a lot to do with the words we use, where they use heart rate monitors and galvanic skin response, and they can measure the changes in you based on the words you say. So using swear words, curse words, loving, kind, empathetic words, it changes your body's physiology. You may not really notice, but if you're honest with yourself, you can feel a difference, maybe even just listening to me say something like, gosh, that person's crazy, versus, that person's struggling with obsessive compulsive disorder. And, they feel different to say. I think they feel different to hear, and they have implications that are very different. One leads to empathy and the other does not. And they're not accurate. That's what I liked about this article, is that they were talking about if we use different language, it's not just that we're trying to be nicer, but it's actually that we're trying to describe what the person's actually going through in a more accurate way, which engenders improvement, treatment, empathy, support, understanding. We've had people from all walks of life on this show. It always impresses me. It's something I almost walk away with every week. The fact that we have people from all levels of the socioeconomic status, genders, race, education levels, financial abilities, all those different things, backgrounds, doesn't really matter. Addiction can become part of anyone's life. And so the cool thing is there are treatments available. A lot of great places. Utah has a lot of wonderful certified recovery centers. I'm proud to have our show be sponsored by Reprieve Recovery Center up in Morgan, Utah, because they do great work, as do so many others. And I think if we are more educated about what's really going on, education, it creates knowledge. And when I was a kid, you'd watch Saturday morning cartoons. Knowledge is power. Everybody remembers that. And, it's the power to change things and improve them. By labeling and putting people down, nothing ever gets better. And so I definitely would encourage you to think about the words you use about substance use and abuse and addiction and mental health. And if you find some room for improvement, try it out. Experiment with using different words and phrases. See how it feels. I think it'll feel good to you and anybody who's listening to you blabber on about whatever you're talking about. I guess also a little quick wrap up, a plug to talk to your teenagers, especially kids, celebrating their graduation this time of year. Please talk to them about not drinking and driving, not being in cars with people that are drinking and driving, and empower them with solutions. Get an app on their phone so they can call an Uber for a friend or for themselves, or let them know that you're okay with them calling you to wake you up to come get them, or staying over someplace so that they're safe. Let them know you love them and care about them. And I think we'll make it through this season a little bit happier here in Utah and all around the country. So I hope people will do that. Any final thoughts, Josh?
No, it's great. Just be more empathetic. That's pretty much.
It's hard to go wrong with being empathetic.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for the show today. We'll be back with, I think, a more traditional show next week with Casey on board and a guest. But thanks for having me in the show today in the studio. And just to remind you that we're brought to you by ReprieveRC.com, Reprieve Recovery Center up in Morgan. And Josh, in case you forgot, Project Recovery is
a KSL podcast.
Well done.